Welcome to this webinar presentation, How to Measure Influencer Marketing ROI. My name is Jon Davids here at Influicity. Thanks for joining us today. This webinar filled up fast. Tons of interest, tons of engagement when it comes to understanding influencer measurement. I gotta tell you, we've been in this business for about 6-7 years, and from being a small company to being a company doing millions and millions in influencer transactions every year, the measurements get better and better, but brands oftentimes aren't utilizing all the measurement tools and tactics that exist. So I'm gonna get into them here. I'm gonna talk about both the qualitative and the quantitative side. I'm even gonna assign some values, some dollar values at various areas of the funnel to demonstrate how we think about influencer marketing measurement here at Influicity. If you're a regular viewer of our content, thanks for joining us again. If you're new here, Influicity works with brands and agencies across influencer marketing, podcasts, and paid media platforms. Our research and our content is totally free. All we ask is that if you find this content valuable, go ahead and share it with a colleague or post it on social media. We really appreciate it. Okay, influencer marketing measurement. Let's do it.
Welcome to this webinar presentation brought to you by Influicity, trusted by world-class brands for influencer media, original podcasts, and marketing across emerging platforms. Here is your host, Influicity CEO Jon Davids.
Okay, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, again. Excited to get into it. I'm going to move along in the presentation, and if you have any questions along the way, feel free to put them in the Q&A area. If I don't get to them during the presentation, we'll make sure to get to them afterwards. So a quick overview of what we're going to talk about. First of all, we'll talk about the evolution of influencer marketing ROI, how the vehicle has been measured over the years, and how that's evolved over time. We'll get into some quantitative measurement. I'm going to get into dollar amounts and a really sort of in-depth understanding of how we think about influencer marketing down the funnel, elevating ROI and really pushing that forward. That really is the crux of the presentation, because it's not just so much about measurement, it's how you amplify and drive certain types of ROI. And then we'll get into some key takeaways and just some bullet points to take away and hopefully help you in your day-to-day. So the evolution of influencer marketing ROI, really, we kind of think about it in 4 stages, and how we look at it is as follows. So at the very beginning, we've been in this business since 2015. I've been doing it since 2013, even before I founded Influicity. And at the very beginning, it was all about leaning on PR ROI principles. So it was very much a public relations practice, an earned media communication practice, and the same metrics that we would look at if you came from a PR background, which I didn't, but if you came from a PR background, those same metrics are what you would look at when it came to influencer marketing back in the early days. Then after that, you would look at things like media buzz, chatter, content, how things perform. And it was very, very, very qualitative. It was very hard for people to draw comparisons between their influencer marketing spend and the rest of their media spend, digital, social, search, out of home, broadcast. It's very hard to create comparisons there. Then you started to get into some in-between metrics, such as likes, comments, engagement, and we were able to at least quantify. I'm not so sure that the numbers meant anything or were really useful, but at least you could go to your superiors and put into a marketing deck and say, hey, here's what we did, and here are some numbers that came out of it. And finally, we've been moving very much towards a media buyer, media seller standard metric model. In other words, the way we think about it at Influicity is that the same way you can measure your spend across all digital broadcast out of home channels, you should be able to do that across influencer. It varies depending on what kind of influencer marketing you're running, what platforms, what industry you're in, the tactics you're using, and we'll get to some of that during this presentation. But generally speaking, whatever measurement tactics you're using across the board, you should be able to include those in influencer marketing. And that really is the evolution of from 1, 2, 3, 4, how we've seen this evolve over the last 6, 7 years. So if we look at the funnel, it looks something like this, and I'll talk about each point in the funnel. So at the very top, you've got awareness, and how we correlate that to influencer marketing is things like impressions and reach. Below that, you've got engagement, which is likes, comments, and shares. Depending on the platform, it could also be things like video views, video hang time, how long you watched content for. Purchase intent is generally seen as web traffic, hang time, and conversion. So are you taking an action that in some way is implying that you're going to be buying something now or at some point in the future? Sales lift, of course, is generated revenue. It could also be something like if you're getting people to sign up for a credit card or open a bank account or fill out an application or something like that. Could also be that action they've taken, and then you can apply a ratio to say, for every X number of people who take this action, we know that we convert Y number of people. So that will give you your sales lift number. And finally, at the very bottom of the funnel, most valuable, you've got loyalty, which is really a combination of all of the above, and maybe even a little bit more than that. People sharing and telling your story, becoming advocates, engaging with you on social media, and truly evolving in that purchase cycle. So from awareness, engagement, purchase intent, sales lift, and loyalty, that's how we think about the purchase funnel in the case of influencers, of course, outside of influencers too. So how do we actually assign dollar values to this? Now, this is the part of the presentation where I'm actually going to show you some dollar values. I will preface this by saying these are our own internal numbers. They do change. We actually update our metrics quarterly, and they also change by industry. So I'm giving you a very broad range here. So in terms of a CPM that we can apply to awareness, so in other words, if we generate awareness, what is that worth? We typically look at an $8 to a $19 CPM. And what that means is through a combination of organic and paid influencer content, we are trying to get to a CPM cost per thousand of, at the low end, $8 and at the high end, $19. So that would be looking at the number of people that see the content, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, TikTok, etc. Let's multiply that, or I guess do the calculation to determine how much we spent divided by the views, and then get that CPM. That's how we look at the top of the funnel awareness. When you get into engagement, it can be anywhere from a $2 to a $7 cost per engagement. This is the typical cost per engagement, or CE range, for many of our popular turnkey packages. So essentially what we're saying is, client spends $50,000, $100,000. We need to ensure that if engagement is our metric, a $2 to a $7 CPE is where we're happy. Again, can vary widely across industry, but that's a pretty good range. Cost per click. Typical CPC when running influencer performance marketing, many variables, but we look at about a 90 cent on the low end to a $4 on the high end. Why the range? Well, you can imagine that if we're talking about, getting a free or a discounted offer the next time you buy groceries, that might get a higher CPC, or excuse me, a cheaper CPC, higher click-through rate, versus, sign up for this obscure mortgage application, which is going to be much more targeted, and you're going to have to pay more for that CPC. And finally, cost per acquisition, typical CPA range, which can vary widely, $20 up to $90. So where we're seeing CPA working a lot with e-commerce brands, working a lot with companies that are trying to drive applications or registrations for high ticket purchases. You want to buy an automobile, you want to sign up for SaaS software, you might be, that customer's worth a lot more. So if you're selling, a $20,000 software package, you don't mind paying $90 for that lead who's going to convert 50% of the time, right? So that's kind of how we think about it. So this is the range that we look at. I'll talk a little more about these numbers as we go through the presentation. Let's take a look now at elevating your ROI and looking at some distinct areas and how we can use them to our advantage. So the first thing we always like to talk about is defining your measurement parameters. it's really important to define what exactly you want to measure and what success looks like for you. I can't tell you how often. I was actually just having a conversation with a client earlier this week. There were a few people on the call, and one person on the call was saying they want to see engagement on the content, and that's their number one metric. Another person on the same call was saying they want people to apply this for an application that they were putting out there. A third person was saying they were interested in collecting first-party data to use in their digital marketing efforts. And of course, these are all valid, totally possible objectives, but these are really three different campaigns. So the slide I'm about to show you, which illustrates, or excuse me, the slide I just showed you, which illustrates the quantitative benchmarks, it's useful, but it's really useless if you haven't defined the parameters of what you're trying to achieve. Because if you dilute it, you're really not going to get very far. Really try to focus on one thing, and that's going to help you along the way. Okay, choosing appropriate influencers. This is a really, really important one. I did an entire webinar on influencer selection. You can check it out on our YouTube channel. That's really going to help. But choosing appropriate influencers for the objective that you have, is going to make or break your campaign. If you want influencers that are going to be able to reach a certain geographic target, and you choose a macro influencer who has millions of followers, but their audience is national, doesn't matter how much money you spend or how hard you try, you're not going to reach that ROI that you want. Same thing about influencer categories, influencer verticals, the platforms that they post on. So that influencer selection process, we like to say, is about 90% of the success that you're going to see if you're in your influencer campaign. Choose the wrong influencers. I don't care how hard you try. It's very, very hard to run a successful campaign if you've not done your influencer selection properly. Okay, level of influencer. So when analyzing the influencer ROI, it's really, really important to think about the context of how notable the influencer is. There's a webinar that I did I think it was a month or two ago, called 5 Influencers You Need to Have on Speed Dial, that covered the different levels of influence from a celebrity, macro, micro, et cetera, et cetera. Let me give you some examples right here, though. So you can have an influencer who is, let's say, a mainstream celebrity. They are on TV, or they do something notable in the public eye. They have a decent online following across Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. Now, right away, you're going to pay a premium for that influencer because they're on television. They probably have high caliber representation. And especially if you're not skilled with influencer pricing, you're going to pay a premium relative to the engagement that they're going to generate. You pay the premium because they are a brand name and because they're on television, mainstream celebrity. Take another influencer who might have the exact same audience size, maybe even bigger, but all they do is social media content. They're not on television, they're not in the public eye, but they create great content on Instagram and TikTok. I can tell you, without even knowing who these hypothetical influencers are, you're going to get a much better ROI with influencer 2. Doesn't matter that influencer 1 has better brand name recognition, they're on TV, people should know them. Their content is not going to perform as well as that person who's a native social talent. And you're also not going to pay as much. So the denominator, if I'm getting my math right, the denominator in your equation is going to be lower. So you don't have to worry even if you don't get as many clicks, it's okay, you didn't pay as much. So that's a quick example. There's many different types of influencers. Again, you could check out the webinar on our YouTube channel, and it'll give you the 5 types of influencers and what the use case is. Make sure you're picking right if you want to maximize ROI. Okay, creative matters. So let's face it on this one. Creative really does matter. I always tell our creative specialists here at Influicity, we win and lose campaigns on 2 things. Number 1, the quality of the influencers and the strength of our creative execution. And you've got to make sure you get those 2 things right. Now, I want to be clear, going back to what I said a few minutes ago. If I had to pick just one, I would say that influencer selection is slightly more important than the creative. And I know that there's a bunch of creative people who are hearing that and are going to get mad at me for saying it, but just hear me out for a second. A really, really good influencer who knows their audience well will make up for weak or subpar creative. They will, because they know how to attract attention. It's sort of like going to a comedy club and seeing a comedian who's not doing a great act, but they can riff off the audience and they can get you to laugh. If you have really good talent, they will make up for weak creative. But that's not an excuse to have weak creative. You want to go in with a concept that actually lives on its own. There are many examples, many case studies I've shared before. You know, the stuff we've done with big retailers like Walmart or with movie studios. If you go in with a strong creative framework, lots of influencers can have fun with it, and lots of influencers can make the most of it. So creative does matter if you want to maximize ROI. Okay, the $1 million question. What's a good engagement rate? I wish I had a nickel for every time someone asked me this. I'm sure many of you have been asked many times as well, or maybe you're the one who asks the question, what is a good engagement rate? And how do I know I'm getting a good return on my investment from an engagement standpoint? So here's my answer. It depends on many, many things. First off, the category makes a big difference. Food, beauty, tech, finance, automotive. These all have different benchmarks for what kinds of engagement we want to see. If I saw the kind of engagement on a piece of beauty content that I see on a piece of automotive content, I would say that beauty content did very, very badly. And vice versa. If an automotive piece performed like the beauty piece on TikTok, I'd say, wow, that's awesome. So depends on the category. We ran a campaign a few months ago, just as an example, with a photography company. And we had some of the best photographers on Instagram posting content. And it was a really, really successful campaign in terms of driving awareness for a new product launch that our client was doing. But the engagement rate was actually terrible. The engagement rate was like 0.5%. It really wasn't very good. But the reason was simple. People don't tend to comment on beautiful photography on Instagram. It's not very engaging from a commenting standpoint. You look at it, maybe you do a like, but the comments are way, way below what you would normally see than, for example, on a piece of weight loss content or a piece of, a content having to do with a Q&A, for example. So the type of content makes a big difference. We were very, very fortunate. We explained to the client ahead of time, because this wasn't our first time doing it. We said, hey, just so you know, you're not going to see a lot of comments, but don't worry. The engagement on this is something that is going to be lesser than you'd normally see. So for a broad rule of thumb, I would look at a 2 to 3% engagement rate on content. Changes dramatically. Some influencers might have a 5% engagement rate because they do question and answer, they do audience surveys, things like that. So it's very much case dependent. But if in general, if you're seeing a sub 2% engagement, something might be wrong, with the exception of a few categories. Okay. Reactions follow reactions. So if engagement is something you're looking for, if you've decided in your dashboard, hey, engagement is really where we see a lot of ROI, that's how we define ROI, then you got to think about how to generate that engagement. People generally don't want to engage with a post that doesn't already have a lot of engagement. Being the first to like something, being the first to comment, weighing in when nobody else has done so, people are hesitant. They don't want to do that. So one of the main drivers of engagement is existing engagement. Now, this definitely presents a chicken and egg scenario, because how do you get something if you need that thing in order to get more of it? And there are actually some solutions to this. I'll share a couple here. So first off, you can incentivize people. You can incentivize them to comment. You can incentivize them to like. You can incentivize them to tag. That does work up to a point. It can have a positive impact. I would say it works in certain categories better than others. Secondly, you can push engagement by seeding other influencers to engage with your posts. And the fact that they've engaged will drive a lot of other people to engage as well. Certain platforms do that better than others, highlighting who has already engaged and surfacing that to the top. There are about a half a dozen other things that we've done to fuel engagement. But the key here is to understand that if you have very few people commenting, liking, sharing to begin with, you're going to have diminishing returns at that point, because you're not going to be able to get more until you seed that initial reaction somehow. Okay, how do we drive clicks to a landing page? One of the key goals, the key CTAs that a lot of brands want to do. We've been doing a lot more of this lately because, in fact, certain platforms have made it a lot easier to do this over the last 6 months or so. On certain platforms like Snapchat, we're seeing a ton of success, especially with commerce-driven marketing, and I'll talk more about that on the next slide. But if you're running an influencer campaign pushing to an e-commerce store or something you can buy online, there are definitely a lot more tools now than there were, say, 6 or 12 months ago to do that. There is some complexity to how to make the pieces work. I wouldn't say that the platforms make it easy, but if you can mishmash the right tools together, it definitely is possible. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds now, but it's definitely there. Another tactic we've been seeing a lot, again, without getting into too much detail, is running influencer campaigns with a very, very compelling call to action, getting people to a landing page and doing it in a way that captures first-party data. So the wonderful thing about first-party data, there are so many reasons. Number one, because of the iOS 14 changes, we're all looking for ways to capture first-party data. Influencer is a phenomenal way to do it. Capturing first-party data, though, allows you to connect with that influencer beyond that initial transaction. Excuse me, I misstated that. It allows you to connect with that customer, not the influencer. So by having an influencer create content that drives a strong call to action, getting people to provide you first-party data, their name, their phone number, their email, you then don't need to worry about getting them to complete a transaction right in that first visit, because you can email them, you can text them, you can stay on their radar for the next week, 2 weeks, month, 2 months, and you can close that loop later on. So capturing first-party data is actually a really, really great way to integrate into an influencer campaign. Again, lots and lots of ways that we've done it, but just keep in mind that that's an important thing to do. Snapchat and TikTok, like I mentioned, are a couple of places where we're seeing it. It's not so intuitive in terms of how you make it happen, but once you figure it out, it's a gold mine for low-cost traffic. And we've seen this in categories like finance, entertainment, CPG, so it is quite versatile. Okay, drive to purchase. Of course, something that a lot of brands want to do. So again, Snapchat and TikTok, what I would say in this case is it comes down to the creative. So influencers can definitely drive people to do all kinds of things. Go to a website, sign up for this, learn about a brand or demo a brand that you haven't tried before. But getting them to actually buy something is quite elusive, something a lot of brands want to do, of course. Getting them to buy involves that the purchase activity happens very seamlessly. So it's not just about, hey, let's get the influencer campaign right. It's about, what does that transaction look like? How many clicks from the moment I hear about the purchase or the product to when I purchase it? Can I purchase it in platform? Do I have to leave the platform? Do I have to leave the app? How many clicks? Is it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 clicks? Do I have to sign up and then go to a newsletter? So the purchase funnel, which is something we work a lot on here at Influicity, really optimizing that funnel, can get you to the purchase point. But on the influencer side, all I'll highlight is that you have to make it super clear in the influencer creative messaging that they're telling the customer to buy something. I can't tell you how many times we've seen campaigns happen and a client, let's say not our client, but a client that we're working with comes to us and we say, hey, what have your previous experiences been? And they say, well, we've tried to get people to buy things. And we say, great, show us the creative content. And we look at the content, and nowhere in that content did the influencer say, buy this. You should buy this now. Here's how you buy it. They just show the product. Hey guys, here's a new skin cream I'm using. Here's a new cell phone case, cool. But unless you tell people to buy it, they're not even going to go down that path. So make sure that's a part of your creative messaging. All right, amplify content. Amplify, amplify, amplify always. This is one of the greatest ways to sort of very quickly surge the ROI in your influencer marketing, is to take that content, transform it into IAB standard units, video, display, mobile, however you're doing it, whitelist it. There's 17 different formats that we use at Influicity to amplify content. However you're doing it, make sure that you're taking the influencer content, the stuff that's performing the best, and turn it into an IAB unit that you can run and amplify in all kinds of ways. Again, there's a whole, I've done probably 2 or 3 webinars on amplification, so I'll leave it there for now, but make sure amplification is a part of your influencer program. If it's not, I would say if just by adding that one piece in, 30% increase in your ROI, easy, easy. Okay, let's talk briefly now about performance marketing versus brand marketing. So brand marketing focuses on awareness, brand equity, and brand positioning. Lots of creative freedom, whereas the performance marketing side focuses on a transaction result, such as a click or a sign up, and you have to make the math work. I'll just speak briefly about these 2 things. Both work, but different types of influencers are required. So I almost think about it like you're standing at the top of a mountain, and you can go left down the mountain or you can go right down the mountain. But once you make that decision, you cannot go back up the mountain and then change direction. So figure out which side of the mountain you want to go down, the brand marketing side or the performance marketing side, and commit to it. So I'll speak briefly about brand marketing. Most of what I've talked about is brand marketing, even when you're talking about driving to a purchase or driving to a click or registration, we're generally talking about brand marketing. If you want to totally optimize for performance marketing and you say, listen, John, I don't even care, what the content looks like. I'm not interested in any of that. We can supercharge a performance marketing campaign. What you're going to have to sacrifice there is a lot of the oversight that brands are used to seeing. So sometimes a brand will say to us, okay, so we want to, drive performance marketing, but we really want to see every piece of content that goes out. We want to be able to have edits made. We want to be able to, do 5 drafts of the content with each influencer. What you're really saying is you want to run a brand marketing campaign with performance marketing objectives, which just doesn't work. A performance marketing campaign means you are getting as many influencers as possible, micro, nano, mid-tier influencers, maybe even some macro and mega influencers in there, but you're getting as many influencers as possible, and you're getting them to create content that drives a specific result. You can put some parameters in there, like you can't swear, you can't do anything that's super inappropriate, nothing like that. But in terms of what the creative really looks like, you really can't have much control over it, because every single influencer is going to know what triggers their audience, what sets their audience off to take an action. And you don't want to be the one to dip your fingers in there and say, hey, why don't you change this to that? Because they're going to say, well, by changing this to that, you're really not getting the result you want. So if you want to drive results, you want to drive performance marketing results, then let the influencer do what they know gets their audience moving. Last thing I'll say about performance marketing is you have to make the math work. So really simple equation to think about is if an influencer normally makes, let's just say $1,000 on a post, and you want them to do something that's performance marketing based, where they're being measured on how many clicks they get you, how many conversions they get you, you have to give them the ability to make more money. I'm not saying you have to give them more money, you have to guarantee them more money, but you have to at least give them the ability to make more money. Simple example, if you make $1,000 on a post, I will pay you $100 for every sign up you get me. And I think there's a pretty realistic scenario that you can get me 15. Therefore, you'll make $1,500 on this post. So at least that way, the influencer doesn't think you're crazy. The influencer, okay, well, hang on a second. So I can make $1,000 normally, but I can actually make $1,500 or maybe even $2,000 on this post. There's lots of ways to make the math work. And there's some other things you have to do to actually make it work for you also, which we can get into at a later time. But make the math work for an influencer. Worst thing you can do is say, hey, I know you make $1,000 on a post, but I'm going to pay you $100 for every conversion you get. And maybe if you're lucky, you'll get 2 or 3. All right, so you're saying I'm going to get paid $300 then in my best case scenario. Just doesn't work. So really make sure the math works if you're running a performance campaign. All right, key takeaways here. I'm going to fly through these because I know we're half past the hour. People want to get to their next meeting. So ROI has many different definitions. You've got to pick one for yourself. Figure out what the ROI is for you. Is it engagement? Is it clicks? Is it conversion? Is it gathering first-party data? Is it awareness? Where do you fall on that funnel? And how do you optimize for that thing? Define benchmarks and stick to them. I find too often brands are too easy on themselves and too easy on their influencer marketing efforts. They don't weigh their influencer marketing efforts in the same way they weigh other marketing efforts. If I said to most brand managers, what's your ROI on Facebook? What's your ROI on Google? What's your ROI on television? They can give me specific numbers, email, et cetera, mobile marketing. But when I say influencer, I get wishy-washy. I'm not sure. Sometimes we get a lot of views. It flops. It does well. That's really not the way to run influencer marketing in 2021. Our clients wouldn't stand for that, and neither would we. You really need to make sure you're defining benchmarks and sticking to them. And with some repetition, you can get to a rinse and repeat cycle where you're actually making progress every time. And finally, influencers can fuel a lot of other marketing activities. So when calculating your ROI, don't just think about that influencer campaign. Think about what else is happening because of the influencers. We think about this in terms of last click attribution. If you're running a search campaign, you might say, oh, great, I spent $10,000 on Google. I got this many clicks and that led to this many conversions. Well, that's great, but let me ask you this. How many of those people would have clicked had they not already seen your influencer marketing piece? So think about the influencers you have and what they're doing and the halo they're shining on all of your other marketing activities. Factor that into your ROI as well. And I think you'll find that that increases the value of the influencer content. Okay, thanks so much for sticking with me. For webinars just like this and others, youtube.com/Influicity. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.